On this week's episode of the Father Dynasty Podcast, Tyler and I will be talking traveling with family back at home, our first FF Expo experience, and best ball favorites. So without further ado, what is up, everybody? Welcome to yet another episode of the Father Dynasty Podcast. I am your fatherly host, Chu, here in the manhole, here to talk fatherhood, fantasy football, and everything in between. And with me today is a very special guest, a frequent flyer, as I think he got a couple more miles on our trip this past weekend. He will be joining me at Bank of America Stadium to enjoy the showdown that is CJ Stroud and Bryce Young later this year. You can check him out on Twitter at tdaily11. Tyler, how you doing, brother?
Doing great. Great weekend, settling back in. This is the last weekend where we don't have anything on the calendar for probably the foreseeable future football season, both from a professional standpoint and a personal standpoint. Brings a lot of crowding to the calendar in the daily household. So just enjoyed some seltzers, some warm weather down here. Just good relaxation this weekend. How are you doing?
Not too bad. Just catching up on one thing that I've neglected, which is my backyard. And I don't even want to send you a picture because I've seen how immaculate your yard is. I think you would see my backyard and think it's possibly in Jumanji. We had a nice issue with towards like the latter half of the yard. All throughout the yard, though, we have chipmunk holes. Like they've burrowed there's like a mansion of colonies all throughout the yard, which I could care less. It's not a problem. But it becomes a problem when apparently yellow jackets take them over because it's basically like the chipmunks have evicted themselves and they just left the house. So then the yellow jackets decide to live in there. And I find that out, it was about a month ago, I found that out when I ran over one of the holes and then one stung me in the leg and then I just sprinted away. So thankfully I didn't get stung anymore. But so now the latter half of my backyard, I can't mow it because there's a lot of angry yellow jackets. So I have to get a pest person out there, I guess, but I don't know how long that's going to take. I don't know if they could even get rid of them or not. So
let's cut to the chase. You need to get a beekeeper suit or call a good apiarist, something, be sensible about it.
I was going to say, come on, Tyler. I don't use a bad apiarist.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Well, the first thing I thought when it was, I got stung and I was like, is that a bee? That's a hornet. I'm going to slap an H on this yard. But, anyway, jumping into, I know, of course, we're still, like you're saying, recovering and settling back in after a long weekend away. And I think that changes tremendously, once it's starting a family and all that kind of stuff and, what you're used to for your schedule. And like you're even saying, it's not often that a weekend is free, let alone a couple in a row. So what is your process like for before you leave town, whether it be, just a 2-day weekend, 3-day, 4-day weekend? Like, is it trying to set up a bunch of stuff before you leave so it's easy as possible, or is it, how do you kind of arrange things?
Well, it depends on if it's a family trip or if it's just a boys trip or, me leaving for a work trip or something like that. If it's me solo, I liken it to, and I'm sure people who tune into this podcast would be familiar with the league from FX, where the last couple of days turn into terrific lady day as I'm just trying to do everything that I can to appease my wife, whether it's flowers, whether it's cooking a meal that she loves, just this, that, and the other to try to make it smooth sailing to bank whatever sort of positivity I can go into the weekend where, while I'm away, if there's frustrations, like there was maybe, last weekend with the dog eating a makeup sponge and, that coming out the back end and maybe some manual extraction, if you will, and I'll leave the rest of that up to your imagination, but things that inevitably occur when you're out of town. So just trying to run interference for that on the front end. But if it's us as a family, I think the number one thing that we try to accomplish is cleaning the house before we leave, because it just is such a better mindset when you come home if the house is just immaculate versus like coming in and there's clutter, because you already know that next week when you come back in on that Sunday afternoon, regardless of what you're doing, whether it was a fun trip, whether it was a not fun trip, the rest of your week is going to kind of be on skates a little bit. So coming into a clean house, maybe some clean bed sheets, just setting it up to where at least that part of your week is going to go smooth. You're not going to have time to grocery shop or meal plan or anything like that. So I'd say that's like the X factor to success for us.
Yeah, that's the funny thing. And when it's leaving the house, like, for the weekend, so if it's everybody going, and the first thought is like, all right, well, not only do we have to get everyone packed and make sure we don't forget anything and all that, yeah, it's all right, we need to jam, like, as much as you can space it out, like, throughout the week, like, all right, I need to clean this enough to where, like, the vacuuming or whatever, like, has to be the last thing is the last thing and that we do. Yeah, change the sheets, and then getting back on Sunday, even if you never have if you don't have a busy week necessarily coming up, I feel like Monday is just generally chaotic anyway. And the fact of, you come in Sunday and knowing that everything is set up is tremendously easier. And yeah, that is even assuming it's a good, fun trip that you come back, because you're still probably exhausted if you actually had fun. But
don't get me wrong. We talked about this on the trip. And for those who don't know, like, my wife and I were taking a big trip to Europe for our 5-year anniversary in October. And I'm like already dreading, because we're coming. I did campaign mildly to come back in on Saturday to leave a full day for recuperation. But what inevitably won out was an extra day of exploring in Europe. And don't get me wrong, when I'm on my deathbed, however long it is from now, we're going to remember the extra days of travel and things like that, and not what I'm about to complain about. But I'm like already worried about we're landing on Sunday afternoon, God willing, if travel goes smoothly, with all the delays and everything that everyone's experiencing these days. And it's just like land on Sunday afternoon. And then we're talking about the ultimate Sunday scaries of having to go back to work like on Monday morning. It's already me. So needless to say, given what we've just talked about, the house will be immaculate before we leave for Europe. So
yeah, I didn't think about that too, because there's always the hope that nothing happens like messed up with flights, but I guess it's the extra wrinkle of it's coming back from a international flight versus a domestic flight. So the hope would be, even if it gets bumped a little bit, if it's already on Sunday, I'm sure, I guess, adjusting to, is jet lag, is it worse in one direction or the other? Is that a thing?
Yeah,
I know
I'm
you
not
traveled
sure.
to Vegas a little bit, so I didn't know if that was.
Yeah, in my experience, at least traveling like West Coast and East Coast in the U.S., it's just like it's just screwed up. Like,
Yeah.
I think in the European trip, it may actually be some like more concrete of like, oh, hey, I'm awake in the middle of the night, or tired in the middle of in the morning or something.
Yeah.
Where it's just like those 2 or 3 hours, give or take, across the country. It's just, for me personally, it's just like I'm just messed up. Like,
Yeah.
it's not that I'm tired at inappropriate times. It's just I'm just tired. Like,
Yeah.
But this is, I think, at this in England, I think it's a 6-hour difference. I think once you venture over into Germany, where we'll end up, will be like almost 8 hours, and so that's
Okay.
like getting close to a polar opposite flip of the day, where it's
Yeah.
midnight here, it's it's like 8 in the morning there. So that's going to be challenging, but I think that first day we'll be able to power through, because we land and immediately go to the Arsenal Man City soccer match. So that's going to be, the adrenaline's going to be up.
Yeah.
There's going to be free flowing alcohol. We got the open bar package at the stadium. So there will be plenty of incentives to keep me awake there. But on the way back, it's like, you're already not excited about coming back to work, and then add in the jet lag factor. It's probably going to be a little bit of a rough week. Not to mention our fiscal year end is in October, so that's a really great time for me to go on vacation. But like I said, in 50 years or whatever it is down the road, when I'm on my deathbed, this will be a trip we'll probably always remember.
The tone in which you said fiscal year ends, I can imagine that you just have a note in your phone of just all of the shit like that, where it's like, all right, get the end of this fiscal year straight. Like, I gotta get this ready to go. So
yeah, I can already hear my like sales manager and boss talking. Like, really, you're taking like a week off right now? Well, what are you gonna do?
And so now I'm thinking, so is it the end of October, like the true end of it, or
Mm-hmm.
okay? All right, so us going to that Texans Panthers game will be ideally a celebration of you having a tremendous year.
Yeah, I'm
That's the plan.
hoping so, and I may actually even have some customers at that game. So
Nice.
they picked their top two choices, because our company has season tickets, and their top two choices were the Cowboys game and the Texans game. So we'll see how that shakes out, but may have to swing by and say hey and thank you for your business, and hope that we haven't had too many cocktails to make a fool of myself and lose an account while we're out there.
No, that's your sales juice. You're ready to go.
Yeah, that's right.
So, speaking of the juice, I think the juice was loose at the Expo this year, and I think we'll go ahead and hit a keep, trade, cut. We haven't done this in a while, but Expo edition, so this will be a very good time.
So I have to choose my favorite. I'm going to keep...
Oh, dear. I will trade.
This is kind of wild.
The cut is easy, and it's the last one.
Keep, trade, cut, of course, a favorite or a hated trade tool for people in the fantasy community out there. So we have 3 options here and 3 different topics, all related to the FF Expo experience that we just had the other weekend. So the first one we're going to do is food. And the 3 I've got here are, this is 3 different restaurants. We've got Brew Kettle, the staple, Table 6, and we've also got Condado Taco. So Tyler, based on your experience with the FF Expo, how would you keep, trade, cut these guys? So
it's funny. I when you first sent the show notes over to me, I was anticipating this going a different way, and so I'll preface that by saying I thought at least at some point that the continental breakfast at our Home 2 Suites hotel was going to be incorporated.
It might.
So I was prepared to really, really rag on them and the Frisbees they were serving up in forms of breakfast sandwiches. But anyhow, to get to the meat and potatoes, pun intended. Let's see. I think I will. What was the third option besides Brew Kettle? And it was a Condado Taco. Yeah. So I would say I will keep Condado Taco. I will trade Table 6, and I will cut Brew Kettle. Don't get me wrong; it wasn't like Brew Kettle was terrible or anything. It was, in my humble opinion, it was a little bit. It's just one of those mass appeal bar places. It's right there on the campus at the Hall of Fame. So they're just they're not going to go crazy. They're just going to try to bring straightforward food and good beer, because that's what football fans want when they're, especially when they're on campus. There is just something you can walk around and get and know you're getting something solid. Table 6, I was pretty impressed with. That would honestly should probably be my keep, but I don't know if it was the many Miller Lights that I drank on Saturday that helped enhance the flavor of the food at Condado Taco, but I just really enjoyed that place. I thought it was just tremendous, and I'm a little bit prone to liking Mexican food. I mean, that's one of my favorites. So Condado Taco has got to be my number 1.
Yeah, I feel like Condado Taco, it was good because it's not just like the traditional, Mexican restaurant. It did have kind of like that twist of like, I felt like pretty unique styled, different types of tacos, which I thought they were all done very well. And yes, like you were saying, that was at the end of a very long day. So I think if anything, there's a different level of appreciation for the food that we got to enjoy there. But, I think it was still good regardless of that. Yeah, I will say Table 6, some of the best music in a restaurant that I've ever been a part of. I feel like it was just nothing but bangers, but not in a way that made you feel like I need to like not be eating right now. It was still calming enough, but it was some good music there.
And really good, unique approach to the pretzel appetizer. I've never seen something like that, where it's like these pretzel crescent rolls. I mean, they're phenomenal. If I ever open a restaurant one day, I'm stealing that.
Fair enough. And we did get to see how old was it? Penn State? The very old game that we got to see.
Oh yeah.
We were trying to figure out like who the guys were.
It was like Juice. Oh gosh.
Bill O'Brien was the coach, right?
Yeah. I mean, we're talking. That's like right after Joe Paterno. Like Bill O'Brien took Penn State when they were trying to put things back together after the whole scandal. So yeah, we saw some classics on ESPN. I mean, gosh, that was a good day. And I mean, can't beat like $8 Ubers. Shout out to Canton for cheap Ubers and Lyfts. I mean, as long as you played those 2 apps against each other, I mean, I think we came out clean. It was like $35 a piece for Ubers for the whole weekend. Can't get better than that.
Well, we can't, because the next one is travel, and thank you for setting that one up for me, because one of the options is indeed Uber and Lyft. I lumped them in together because I know you had to do that dance very gracefully
Do a
throughout the
little
weekend.
price shopping. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So we've got Uber and Lyft. That's actually one.
Okay.
The flights, we'll lump in that whole experience there. Us getting kicked out of our seats at the behest of a family getting to sit together. And the third one, and this is a long explanation, and I know we get it, but I think it's a funny one to put in here. The mile walk at 11 p.m. from Condado Taco to our hotel. So we appreciate that, but it's a unique spin on that one. So,
Oh man, those are three really good choices. I will cut the Ubers and the Lyfts. We had a couple, especially starting off. We had a fine young gentleman who had some twin bed sheets draped around his seats, and I was at least 25% certain that we weren't going to make it to our hotel, and that was the last time we were going to see anybody that we knew and loved. But I will cut those. I will trade the airplane travel, and it's just because it went smooth. It was anything you could hope for these days, because it feels like all you hear is stories of people with delayed flights and just bad experiences. I did find it weird, obviously, that our seats got switched, but keep that in the back of your mind moving forward, because can we just book like economy seats and then complain to the gate agent and say, hey, we have a family here, like, can we sit together? Because I can't tell you how many times we've purchased a seat so that we could sit next to each other or something, and kind of worried about that process. So it's just, I don't know how much those people had to complain to sit together. I was glad to move to have a family sit together, because as a family man, I respect the plight. But I would have appreciated at least some consent, hey, maybe just a simple question of, would you be willing to give up your seat for this family? Sure. Not rather than just take my seat, but I digress. And then I will keep the mile walk from Condado Taco. I mean, it just doesn't get any better than that. It took me back to the days of Blacksburg and, coming home from the bars after picking up either some Jimmy John's or some Benny's pizza or something, and just walking way farther than you probably should. And people questioning along the way, like, do you know where you're going? Like, oh yeah, like with supreme confidence, like I know exactly where I'm going. So that's my KTC right there.
Yeah, I like that. I think there was a bit of ambiance with the well-lit underpass that we got to walk under. And, certainly the brown bag in it, I think that probably helped the last leg of that little walk there. And yeah, the funny thing is so you were saying about the flights, that's a good point, because I know you were saying, I think you found out like before we got to get on there, like you looked at your phone, you're like, I know I had the different flight, but it just switched it for you. Mine didn't, and I didn't know until I scanned my ticket, and then they made a weird sound, and she just like, oh, hold on, and they just handed me a different ticket. I'm like, I'm sorry, what's happening right now? So, yeah, I hope that family had a wonderful flight, but that is something I will absolutely be trying next time I get on the flight. Is let's just let us sit together. Don't blame me because I waited way too late to get these tickets. Let us stay together. So
yeah. I'm just upset. The only thing that could have made the walk back from Condado a little bit better is if we would have found some guy named Duncan under the bridge, maybe some denim that we could have boiled back in the room, just something like that.
Yeah, have a little luau. I think that's how you say it. Oh man. Well, as you requested from the first one, so the third one is hospitality, and boy did we get it. So the three options here are the mysterious wet spot under the air conditioner. It was there the whole weekend. The second one is the severe corrosion on the shower fixtures. And the third one, but not least, are the hockey puck bagel sandwiches that were there fresh every morning in the continental breakfast.
I'll cut the corrosion on the shower fixtures. That was funny, but it wasn't as much of a sticking point for me. I will definitely keep the wet spot underneath the AC because that also launched a call to the front desk in which Jake was making horribly inappropriate noises and immediately set the tone with us and the hotel staff, and that they were going to be annoyed with us the whole week because I couldn't physically keep a sentence going because I was laughing so hard. And she ended up basically hanging up on me. Yeah, sir, we'll notate there's a wet spot. Click. And then I'll trade the hockey pucks that they were serving up at breakfast only because, you know, we got to pivot to the waffle maker, which also had some toppings and stuff. But yeah, overall, it was like the perfect balance at that hotel overall of like enough, what's the word? Enough, just like enough ratchetness to be interesting.
Yeah.
But like not so much so that it was like it was taking away from the stay. Like it wasn't like it was a crap hole hotel. I mean, it was a decent hotel, and then it has like these mysterious wet spots and gross showers. But still, not that anybody cares, but I'm just fascinated. I've stayed at many hotels over my life, but like I don't think I've ever stayed at a hotel that has a fan in the bathroom. Mm-hmm. But finally, the Home 2 Suites in Canton, Ohio, like has a fan that like what are like
which stopped working halfway through the weekend.
Yeah. Did it really? I didn't even notice. It was probably middle of the night.
Yeah, because I checked because I was like, no, I turned it on, and then I looked and I was like, no, I did. I think it just stopped working. But or maybe it has some sort of sense where it's like, I know when I need to be on. Don't tell me when I need to switch on.
Yeah.
But
it reached a dew point from the soaking carpet that it just the moisture had gunked it up. It smelled like a basement in our room the whole weekend.
Yeah, that is maybe that was the reason it was 61 in there. I think they really wanted to kind of freeze out that wet spot, but then once we turned it to a reasonable temperature, it just the stank grew throughout the weekend. But last but not least, so this one's more of just a bonus question, not necessarily a keep trade cut. So what was your biggest takeaway, best moment, memory, that sort of thing of the weekend for the FF Expo, if you can melt it into one?
Yeah, I mean, I think just on a cheap sentimental level, like it was just awesome being out of town with you guys. You know, we've recorded so many podcasts, and you and I don't physically get to hang out as much outside of this, you know, as we did growing up. So, and even Jacob living 7 or 8 minutes up the road, we both lead busy lives, full-time jobs, both married. You know, I have Emma, we both have dogs. It's hard to find the time in adulthood. So just getting that weekend away, kind of turning back the clock a little bit to almost like the college days was just really invaluable. And then randomly, I mean, just really awesome running into one of my middle school teachers out there. I mean, you talk about just like a total shock. Like Applegarth walks up to me and he's like, I know you. And immediately, like, I'm put on the defensive a little bit. And then as we go further, I realize like who he is. And it just, what a cool moment. Like not only to meet somebody that I haven't seen in, gosh, probably almost like 20 years, but then also that he's involved, you know, in a similar capacity that I am, and that like one of his buddies has a podcast and he helps out. And so, you know, just meeting up with somebody like that, that's just kind of like in the industry, so to speak, was really cool.
Yeah. Cause as much as the expo has grown, you know, in its short lifespan at this point, the likelihood that we would be traveling to Canton, Ohio, to see anyone that we know, let alone it happened to be, like you were saying, like a teacher that has since moved to Pennsylvania now, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's like either Maryland, maybe, I think.
Yeah. But just the sheer circumstance in that is just hilarious. And like, when you turn around to me, you're like, all right, don't look at his name tag. All right, who is this?
Yeah.
That's wild. But yeah, I'm with you on that. It's as we get older, as you know, more things are on our plate. It's definitely tougher to do those sorts of things, and you know, especially when it's getting to go do something where it's not just like we happen to be near each other and catch up. It's more of it's a weekend of actually getting a chance to just hang out and just, you know, walk under an overpass, eat tacos, smell a wet spot. You know, when I say it that way, it doesn't sound as appealing, but I tell you, it was just the weekend I needed. So I'm telling you.
Yeah, it's one of those like, if you know, you know.
Oh yeah. Well, I did not sadly create a cool transition for this one, but I know that weekend you were deep into Underdog as we were, you know, at Brew Kettle watching all of these live drafts happening, and that spurned, you know, getting into your own underdog drafts as well. Say that 5 times fast. And a very cool tool that they have there is getting to look at your exposure across all of your drafts for different players. And it's kind of funny, the ones that maybe you like instinctively, like you're actively picking them as much as you are, or other ones, maybe it's just kind of how the draft ends up falling and you happen to keep picking these guys. But so we saw two of your most drafted guys, and we'll go yours first, and then I'll get one of my guys after this. So your first one was Zach Charbonnet. It looked like you had him in 60% of your draft, so definitely a steady amount. And just to throw it out here, so this was about 2 days ago, but so his ADP was at 106. That had him at the RB 35. And that was, I think it was 50 plus picks after Kenneth Walker, his running mate. So what were was that a surprise for you? Are you all in on him? What was your thought with Charbonnet there?
No, he definitely falls under the category of like a player I'm seeking out more so than just somebody who's fallen to me. It starts with the draft capital, obviously, of where he was taken from Seattle. And I think it's just indicative of today's NFL backfield, and that, we all thought after the way Kenneth Walker performed last season that Seattle was prepared and willing to roll into this upcoming campaign with him as like a true workhorse. And we see somebody even as talented as Kenneth Walker, and they still go and use a high draft pick on Zach Charbonnet. Brandon Thorne, a gentleman who I really respect. He does a lot of the offensive line analysis in the fantasy football space. He has Seattle as his number 9 offensive line. We saw Geno Smith with the resurgence last year. I just overall want pieces of this offense, which is really, really surprising for me to say, because I remember being on this podcast last summer, absolutely dogging Seattle and just saying how I think their over under last year was 4.5 or 5 games or something, absurdly low, and they end up making the playoffs. And now I think, we're probably looking, barring anything unforeseen, at least a 9 or a 10 win team. So it's an offense I want to invest in. And we look at where Kenneth Walker wins. I mean, he's a home run hitter. He's a guy that both visually we've seen, and also from what we've been reading all offseason, is that I think that's kind of how Seattle sees him, is listen, this guy's either going to get 2 or he's going to get 12 and plus and just bust off these big yards. Whereas Zach Charbonnet, I'm not willing to call him a plotter, but he's just a little bit more consistent. And then he caught, I think it's 61 balls in his final 2 seasons combined at UCLA. So it's somebody that's shown his passing game chops. So whereas Kenneth Walker, he did catch passes last year, but I think it was more out of necessity than it was necessarily something that Seattle was actively drawing up for him. So, we've seen Pete Carroll before in the past. He just doesn't really give a crap about what roles people are supposed to have given how much they were paid or anything like that, where they were taken in the draft. It's just, he's just going to take good players that he thinks he can work with and use them. And, I think it's Zach Charbonnet has all of that wrapped up, and then he has massive amount of contingent value should anything happen to Kenneth Walker, which is just, we've seen now, especially with the season getting stretched an extra game, these guys are going to miss time. It's not something that I want to predict or I want to seek out, but it's just a reality. It's somebody's going to tweak an ankle or, just have a little bruised up ribs or something a week or two. And those usable weeks, I think Zach Charbonnet has the combo role to where he's an instant smash RB1 if he's the only guy in the backfield, if Kenneth Walker goes down for anything.
Yeah. And, one thing about Kenneth Walker, I know last season, going into it, he had some hernia type injury heading into the season, or I guess into the preseason. He ended up, coming back and being okay. And then at the beginning of this season, I don't know if he's still battling with it or not, having a nagging groin injury. Between groin injuries, hamstring injuries, not that he has, but I feel like when you see those 2 types of injuries in the preseason, especially once we're actually into the preseason games, you hope that, especially as a running back, it's nursed and he can be ready to go, because if he's the home run hitting kind of guy and he's having some sort of groin tweak or anything like that, I feel like that might severely limit his ability to do that, which is his thing. But someone like Charbonnet, which I was kind of surprised initially that he had went back to school, but he really did he did nothing to hurt his draft capital and his ability to clearly go to a team that at the time didn't seem like they needed it. But yeah, the fragility of the running back position and the fact that the Seahawks really turned it around with how stacked really they are at this point. Seeing that they now already have two steady wide receivers, they get arguably the best or one of the best wide receivers in this class. I say the best, and that's their. Some are talking about could he lead the team in reception. Some are even if it's if he's second or third, he can still have a tremendous season on the receiving end of Geno Smith throws, which again is a weird thing. I feel like we're saying now, a year removed from is it going to be him or Drew Lock? But that Seahawks team has really turned it around, and Charbonnet had him as an RB2 in that class, so I'm hoping that he can carve out enough of a role to mean something. So my guy, my first one here, I've talked about him a lot, so I almost didn't pick him for the sake of not talking about him more, but Anthony Richardson, I have 50% of him. So have his ADP at 102, so that's QB 11. And I'd actually, for goingfor2.com, I was actually doing the projections for the NFC South and AFC South. And my projections for him, I was seeing him as, I think it was about 290, 300 points. And that would put him in the top 10. I think I had him at around 760 to 800 rushing yards. And, I mean, overall, this is something that's probably just my love and affinity for Anthony Richardson is the reason why this ended up happening. But a lot of the time I do try and wait a bit for a quarterback, especially in these best ball drafts. Getting these later guys, the Brock Purdy's, the Sam Howells, the sorts of guys that I trust to do, if I get two or three of these guys and I think they can string together enough weeks to be okay. But, some of the time it is worthwhile to get some of these, really high ceiling, rushing upside guys at the quarterback position. And of course, now I think it was this week, maybe last week, that he has now officially been named the starter in Indy. To no one's surprise there, I would say. No offense to Gardner Minshew, but he's someone who, if I'm going to get him in best ball, I feel pretty comfortable that I can have him and then maybe only need a second quarterback that's a later guy, like the two I mentioned, or maybe even someone slightly later if it's a Jimmy G or Ryan Tannehill, what have you, and see if I can chase a little more upside at the other skill positions. So what are your thoughts on Anthony Richardson?
Yeah, I totally agree. He's what I want out of a best ball quarterback. I'm even interested in him in redraft, but I think the strategy you're talking about in best ball is definitely something that I align with because it makes it even easier. You're talking about not even having to pick pick the weeks that you think he might go off. And that's true. I do a similar approach oftentimes with tight end. If I miss on those top tier guys, if I miss on the top tier quarterbacks or top tier tight ends, I'm more likely to just wait a heck of a lot longer, take two or three of them at the very back end of the draft, because that way I don't have to worry about putting in Sam Howell or Brock Purdy one week that, they may or may not go off. It's like best ball just does it for you. So it's a good strategy in my opinion as well. And Anthony Richardson, I mean, he's just a really interesting prospect. Like, I can't wait to see this guy take the field. He started only one season in college, had his ups, had his downs. He's a very polarizing prospect coming into the draft. You've got people who either love him or hate him. There's nobody who's just kind of like, on Anthony Richardson. Like, everyone's got a really strong opinion. I feel like leading up to the draft, his steam got really, really high. And now it kind of feels like people have really moved off of him in a weird way. It's like, it's almost like his hype has died down, and I don't really know where that's come from. But when I think about him, I think about fantasy players like Tim Tebow, Tyrod Taylor, like quarterbacks who it was not pretty, but he got you there, like at the end. And you may have 6 points through the first three quarters, but they're going to be down 14 in the fourth quarter. And people are going to be in like cover 4, dropping 10 yards off the line of scrimmage. And he's just going to pick up like 12-yard rush after 12-yard rush and then score a couple garbage time touchdowns. And all of a sudden you're looking at like a 24-point game. And I feel like that's Anthony Richardson's floor. And then if he can all put together like some semblance of better accuracy than he had in college, then like you're looking at Josh Allen with potentially even better as a runner. We're talking about a guy like with the physical attributes of he's literally Derrick Henry, like lining up back there. And again, another quarterback I didn't mention, Cam Newton. I mean, people didn't want to take him really his rookie year, and he was a league winner. So I think it's a great best ball pick on your part. And I'm actually probably upset. I'm upset that I don't have even more of them than I do. I don't think I've only gotten into maybe one or two of the drafts I've done.
Yeah, and here's one where after seeing that I had 50% of them, I was a little shocked. Just with it being best ball, like we were talking about, a lot of the time I actively try and wait for quarterback. But apparently in those times when I don't, he's probably the guy that he fell enough to where I was like, I just have to get him right now. And of course I do enjoy, I'm a Pittman fan, I'm a Pierce fan. So, if doing a little stack like that is worthwhile in my opinion. So jumping to your second guy, Quentin Johnston, you have 40% of him, and he had his ADP at 81, so that's wide receiver 40. And what are your thoughts on Johnston?
He's more of a player that I've fallen into more so than I'm seeking out, and somebody that from a best ball perspective, I'm infinitely more interested in than in a redraft league. And that's just as the course currently lies. If God forbid, if somebody like Keenan Allen or even somebody like Josh Palmer or Mike Williams were to go down, I mean, definitely Mike Williams, but even Josh Palmer, it's a talented wide receiver room. And I know that Quentin Johnston is probably going to have like 1 to 2 games. If everybody stays healthy, he's still going to have 1 or 2 games where he's going to catch 3 balls for 80 yards and a touchdown. So in that range, I think, what was his ADP again? Maybe like wide receiver 40, 39, something 40, like that, yeah. I think. Yeah. So in that group, I mean, you're, especially in best ball, like I'm taking upside shots. Like we're already past the guys who have these guaranteed carved out roles. So I want guys that like he can take the top off the defense. I think both vertically and underneath. Like I think he could be an after the catch guy, and I think he's enough of a physical specimen that he can go up and win balls on contested catches as well. So he's been an ascending player each year of his career in college. I love guys that come out after 3 years and then especially guys that come out after 3 and have super high draft capital, because it's like, all right, they were ready to come out as soon as they were eligible to, and the NFL thinks highly of them. So that's like all I need to hop on board. I was off him in the draft process early, but then, not only does he get taken in the first round, but he gets taken by one of the best offenses in the first round. So that got me all the way back on board. But he's definitely, again, somebody that it's more so I find myself looking for a wide receiver in that range oftentimes, and he seems to be the best of the group within that pairing. It's not like I'm targeting Quentin Johnston, so to speak.
Yeah, and I'm with you on, going through the draft process and everything, especially from a dynasty perspective, really not being in on him. It wasn't just he's a body catcher, that kind of thing. It was just, watching him play, for what I did. I get you look at him and just physically speaking, he's a big speedster who can take the top off of defense. And I know just the physical appeal of that, watching a game, especially in college, much more opportunity for that than before you get to the NFL. And not saying that game does not happen, but I think it's maybe nipped in the bud a bit more with maybe more savvy defenses. And of course, NFL players that are likely much better in corners are much better than what they are in college. So, but comparatively to a couple of his rookie running mates, that is behind Addison, and he's ahead of Flowers. I think it's 1 ahead of Flowers. So a couple of those guys are within 5 or 6 of each other there. And yeah, I mean, like you're saying about that offense, like I'm very much in on Herbert with how he's been playing already, with how well he played with his dealing with a rib injury last year. And now he's going to have, I can't speak highly enough of the fact that he's getting Kellen Moore as his OC.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they already had the second most passing plays last year. And even if it stays the same, or even if it stays within the top 5, I feel like that's, if no injuries happen, there's plenty of weapons there, like we were saying with Keenan Allen, Mike Williams. I mean, Gerald Everett's another good one. Eckler, usually one of the top running back guys in terms of targets and receptions. But I still think with Johnston's game, it doesn't require him to get insane target volume. It's just getting him the right targets that allow him to produce from a fantasy perspective, even if it's kind of boom or bust. So.
Yeah, this is an offense that even with the guys that you just laid out, like there's no true speed threat. So like he has the opportunity to be that threat for this offense. I mean, obviously, Eckler's quick, but we're talking from a wide receiver course perspective. I mean, we got Mike Williams. He's a go up and get it type guy. You know, Keenan Allen is a possession receiver at this point in his career he's working underneath. Like, he's definitely not taking the top off. And then Josh Palmer, I mean, he's just struggled a little bit in the opportunities that he's been given. I mean, he's not he's a good wide receiver, but he's not an explosive playmaker. So, I mean, Quentin Johnston has a lane open to him to step up and be that guy that this offense needs. So that's what I'm interested in him. That's what makes me interested in him.
Well, the one who I'm interested in, and I'm sure you are too, of course, fellow Virginia Tech alum, as I see you repping the Hokies as we speak. So the second guy I've got in here is Khalil Herbert. I have 50% of him in my Underdog Best Ball drafts. I've got his ADP at 102, so that has him as the running back 34. One thing for me, you know, with this Chicago Bears offense is they've spent a tremendous amount of money this offseason on both sides of the ball, but also the big trade, being able to bring in DJ Moore is tremendous. Darnell Mooney presumably back and healthy. Cole Kmet getting his money. But overall, when I look at this running back room, you know, we do have David Montgomery gone. And in my mind, with the additions that they had this offseason, I don't really think, you know, for anyone that is a sincere believer in Roschon Johnson, and it's not to say he wouldn't have a role. I think the hope is, you know, a big body like him, someone who can do a little bit of everything. He can be, in my mind, kind of a poor man's Charbonnet. But with that being said, you have someone like Khalil Herbert who did so tremendously well, you know, that home run speed, and I feel like he can take the top off of defense. But now you have someone like D'Onta Foreman who is stepping in behind him. I do think it is Roschon as the third guy, not necessarily the second guy. And that leads Khalil Herbert to, you know, hopefully it's schemed well to where Fields can get it to his guys passing-wise, but that will hopefully continue to open up lanes for Khalil Herbert, as I would assume he gets more volume from a rushing and a receiving perspective than he did last year. But he was, you know, pretty tremendously efficient in the opportunities he did get, just throwing out a couple of numbers. He was top 10 in all these efficiency metrics, yards per touch, juke rate, yards created per touch. And I understand as his volume increases, some of those may trend down a little bit as it's more stuffed runs and, you know, just tough, you know, him having to bear the load of a rushing attack. But I think it'll be split enough between a couple of those running backs that he's not necessarily going to be a bell cow by any means. I don't expect that. But I think from a best ball perspective, like we're talking about, a Quentin Johnston taking the top off of defense, Khalil Herbert's going to have a couple of these home run runs. And even if he doesn't get crazy volume, he's going to have, you know, more than what he did last season, and he's definitely going to prove himself worthy as being drafted at RB 34, which is outside the number of NFL teams in terms of starting. So I guess he's not viewed as the starter, but he is the highest. He has the highest, I guess, lowest ADP of the running backs. So it's kind of funny that all of the Chicago Bears running backs are outside of the top 32, but one of them is going to be the starter. So why not take a dart throw on one of those guys? But I would prefer Khalil Herbert in this scenario.
Yeah, I think where you ended up there at the end is the best way that you can really approach this, is just what other running backs in this range can you take that are potentially going to give you like league winning type upside. And let's just say, you know, we're not talking about the most likely of scenarios here, but like, you know, he's got continuity with the offense. We saw in their first preseason game, I haven't followed up on their second, but in the first one, he took 100% of the snaps with the starters. So it's like, is that indicative of how they view him? Is that just continuity from last season bleeding over? I tend to think it's probably a mixture of the two. But, I mean, this team we saw last year, I mean, they're going to want to run the piss out of the ball. And I'm okay if Khalil Herbert is not involved in the pass game, because in best ball, it's half point PPR on Underdog. So like, what are we looking for? We're looking for touchdowns. Like, you know, we want guys that are going to score. And in a scenario where you have a quarterback like Justin Fields, I don't want the guy who's necessarily going to be relying on pass catching, because scrambling quarterbacks are statistically proven to check down to those guys like infinitely less than their pocket passing brethren out there. Like, I want the guy who's going to be on there to grind it out for carries, because the guy standing next to him taking the snap is just as big of a running threat as he is. So like when we're talking about things like read options and RPOs and all this stuff, like we're opening up huge lanes for Khalil Herbert, and he's done nothing but succeed since he's been in the NFL. I mean, I can't even remember where the Bears took him. Like it was probably 5th round or later. I think I want to say he was a 5th round pick.
Yep.
And those guys have an uphill battle in this league, and he's done nothing but succeed and be an ascending player on that team. And, enough so that, listen, I know they went out this offseason and got Deontay Foreman and they drafted Roschon Johnson, but like those are depth filler type players to me. Like they felt good enough to not re-sign David Montgomery and have Khalil Herbert be a part of that group. And I think he's the leading part of that group. The only thing that scares me about him is that, again, to lean on Brandon Thorne again and some of his offensive line evaluations, he has the Bears as his 26th best offensive line in the league. So I am a little bit concerned about that, but I think hopefully having Justin Fields as a running threat will alleviate some of that, with read option play calling and everything like that. So I've got 20% exposure to him, so I'm not quite as high as you are. But as I sit here and I talk about it, like, I mean, gosh, it's it's August 20th. There's still plenty of time for me to get that exposure rate up, and I think I might have to tick that up after this conversation. I talked myself into it, and you talked me into it.
Yeah, that's the big thing with in comparison, like you were talking about, of like who's around that. It's Antonio Gibson and AJ Dillon are actually just ahead of him, and I do like both of those guys. Honestly, Gibson more so than Dillon, but that's the thing where if Herbert does end up being the starter in terms of just the general touches that he's going to be getting, I'd rather have that obviously than the number 2 guy in either Washington or Green Bay. Although
I think
all of them have that upside with if someone's injured, you step in. So
I was going to say, I think to be fair, like to either of those guys, it's like what out of those 3 players, Khalil Herbert, Antonio Gibson, and AJ Dillon, like which one of those 3 players is most likely to hit RB1 without an injury?
Yeah.
And I mean, like, I don't know if I'm biased or crazy, but I think it's Khalil Herbert. Because we've seen him be productive. Like we know that Aaron Jones is going to be involved in a very, very heavy way in Green Bay. And Antonio Gibson has always been this just like shiny trophy on the shelf that like we keep hearing about how he's, Christian McCaffrey light or whatever. But like, is it him? Is it Brian Robinson? Is it, whoever? So we've said enough, but my last point there.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, it sounds like we may have, I know we have a little bit of time, obviously, before the regular season starts again, so I have no doubt that these percentages may change as we rattle off a couple of more drafts, and certainly there could be some that sneak in as we, as things progress through the rest here of the preseason, but we've talked Expo, we've talked Underdog, and last but not least, it is the exit. It is the gasket and last word, shout out, quote. What do you got for me?
First off, I want to thank you for inviting Jacob and I to go to Canton with you. That was an incredible experience. I hope to get the chance to do that again. So I appreciate you leading the charge on that. And then it's just simple, man. Football's back, baby. I mean, next weekend, week 0 of college football, I will be streaming on my phone, which is peak fall because I'll be at a wedding, so it's just nothing says football season is here, much like going to a wedding and trying to set up so that you can stream a football game and keep tabs on something like that. So I'm just super excited that we're finally here. I mean, preseason's underway. We've got Hard Knocks episodes dropping on HBO. It's time to go, man. It's been a long off season, and I'm just excited as hell that we're finally going to get into the real meat and potatoes of it.
Yeah, it's that time of year, and yeah, definitely be looking forward to doing the Expo next year. That's what I'm hoping would be the plan. And yeah, the big thing for me, I haven't watched all of the Hard Knocks episodes yet, but I know with the first one, again, I think I told you and Jake when we went to the Expo, I had no idea that Liev Schreiber is now the voice of God, so to speak, in the show. So that was very cool that not only is it seeing that was him, but that the first time he ever went to an actual practice was because Rodgers in some interview said, man, yeah, I would love to meet him. And they literally actually brought him on the field. So it was pretty cool. But
yeah.
But all right, brother. Well, good to catch up with you. And absolutely we'll be doing this very soon, and looking forward to talking more football as we actually have real football to talk about.
Let's go. Already looking forward to next time.